Hello, and thank you for joining this Conservative Home event today in partnership with Atos. I'm Charlotte Gill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, and today I'll be chairing a panel in which we explore the government's forthcoming digital strategy and how it can help organisations and businesses embrace digital transformation. With technology having played a key role in keeping the UK economy going during lockdown, we'll look at how policymakers can build on this progress and drive the UK's post-COVID economic recovery. And with me to discuss this topic, I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Warman, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Digital Infrastructure, Clay Van Doren, Chief Executive, Atos UK and Ireland, Anthony Walker, Deputy Chief Executive, techUK, Felicity Burch, Director of Innovation and Digital at CBI, and Mackenzie, Chief Executive of Demos, will be joining us shortly. So to begin with, I'm going to ask each of our panellists to speak for around 5 minutes on today's topic of conversation. And in the meantime, anyone watching, please do feel free to add any questions to our Q&A system, and we'll be delighted to have a look at those. So Matt, let's kick off with your thoughts.
Well, thanks, Charlotte, and thanks to Conservative Home for putting this together. I think it's a statement of the obvious, right, that the current pandemic has accelerated a massive digital leap forward, and we've got to try and make sure that we, as we come through this, strike the best of both worlds. And I think it's worth remembering that where Britain was already when it came to digital services, we were already at the head of the pack. We were already seeing an acceleration that was obviously reflected regrettably in the state of some of our high streets, but was also reflected really positively in access to goods and services online that lots of other countries do not yet see. So there were already sort of really significant swings and roundabouts before that acceleration was accelerated by COVID. And I think we've seen some really interesting steps forward. Some of that, of course, is around the digitization of the health service, around steps that we'd seen the beginnings of, but now, for instance, 99% of GP surgeries offering video appointments. That's not 99% of appointments are by video, but that's the potential to have that kind of interaction at a GP. That's a huge shift in a tiny number of months. We would never have been able to push that kind of pace if it were not for the necessity of the tragedy of COVID. So we've got to sort of accept, I think, that there are some things that have happened incredibly rapidly, and there will inevitably be, over the next few months, some ironing out of what does a really good digital service look like? What do we need to do better? What do we need to do differently? And then, of course, you look at all of our big cities, London in particular, where there is simply not the footfall that is required to sustain the kind of economy that we had just a few months ago. But there are also people reporting significant improvements in their own work-life balance, in their own ability to be productive without having to get on the train every day. Overall, though, what people are saying is simply that they think a hybridized model of some more digital services and some of the physical interaction that we all really value, that is really important for families, it's really important for education, it's really important for the economy, that balance has to be different from what it currently is for the future, because we're all immensely frustrated, as the Chancellor sort of talked about in the papers today. Of course, a 10 p.m. curfew is immensely frustrating, but that doesn't mean that it's not in the moment the right thing to do. So we've got to try and strike that balance that says there are health costs to economic measures, there are of course public health considerations to take into account in getting that balance right as well. And where does digital fit into that? Well, it seems to me that we've obviously got to double down on delivering what the government can do digitally, in making sure that those services are spread evenly across the country as much as they possibly can be. And when we talk about levelling up, I think it's very clear that how have the government's priorities had to evolve over the course of the pandemic. I think what we've seen now is that levelling up is not simply, and I don't think anyone seriously suggested it was solely about infrastructure projects in the north, but I think it was sort of seen through a lens of that kind. I think what we're now seeing is the importance of levelling up on the digital divide, of levelling up on people where some significant health inequalities have been exposed in the course of COVID. So I think we will see the evolution of that sort of language to include a broader spectrum. And that means the digital services that are available in Camden also have to be available across the country. Government has to be able to say with confidence that while there is that degree of specificity around whatever is available online, whatever people are able to do online, that is tailored to an individual's local area, there is also no excuse for saying, well, yeah, you can do that great thing in one part of the country, but such and such a local authority simply hasn't got round to doing it. And that's not a criticism of local authorities, but it is simply something that I think has been exposed in the course of COVID. So I think there are huge opportunities for digital. There are huge ways that they dovetail into that levelling up agenda. And of course, all of that has to go with the kind of investment that we're still very much committed to, that unlocks the potential of areas that have historically not seen the investment that they deserve. I'll leave it there, but very happy to answer questions and looking forward to the discussion.
Great. So now we'll move on to Clay.
Thank you, Minister. And actually, I think quite a bit of what you had there resonates. And I think we have seen some major progress in digital, even if it was inadvertent on the back of COVID, remote healthcare being one of those. A large migration to online, and agree that we're talking about a successful outcome being a hybrid going forward, where we're talking about a combination of online and face-to-face, almost like retailing went through in the early 2000s. Also agree that we ought to double down in digital and use it as a change agent to, in fact, level up. But before we get into digital society, just a quick plug about Atos, because not everybody will know about Atos. But we're Europeans' #1 in driving digital solutions through enablers such as cybersecurity, end-to-end orchestrated multi-cloud and apps transformation. Also, the high-performance computing superpower from Europe that still remains. But we look at ourselves much more than a technology business. We believe that we have something to value and to contribute to wider discussion and to society, going well beyond the technical, but also focusing on the social and economic progress as well. And our commitment to that and that wider debate has resulted in us producing 17 reports over the last 4 years, covering a full spectrum of issues about how technology, well applied, can positively transform society and the economy. And we just launched our Digital Society Thought Leadership campaign, which focuses on how we go beyond technical and theoretical questions into emerging technologies and how they will shape the society we live in. And digital society is a key component of that. But we look at digital society and we think basically it's the core to being fit for a future. And as the title of our event suggests, we need a digital strategy, and we need a digital strategy for this digital society. And I'm really encouraged that DCMS are thinking boldly by developing this new digital strategy. Now is the right time to initiate this thinking, working with stakeholders across business and across the public sector, joining together to drive a policy architecture that'll see us well positioned for this challenging period and able to grasp the opportunities as we go forward. And we're very clear there will be a lot of new opportunities on the back of COVID and the post-Brexit world. But if we look at the digital strategy that's needed, We've highlighted some dramatic changes that have occurred in terms of digital adoption. So grandparents using tools such as this one, Zoom, vulnerable individuals ordering groceries online for the first time, operations moving from virtually 100% on-site to 80% plus off-site in weeks. The volume of traffic has grown 25 to 30% on over the internet during the UK lockdown. And digital infrastructure has a really key part in bridging the gap in the digital divide the minister spoke about, and driving economic growth. And we see this as an opportunity to rebalance the UK economy away from its over-reliance on London and the Southeast. And we must capitalize on this opportunity. As we look forward, we can't let slow internet connections be a barrier to growth, right? With 45% of manufacturing companies, according to CBI, identifying poor connectivity as a barrier for them making an additional investment. So as we look at defining the digital strategy, our view is that we like to see something that leverages our our collective post-COVID-19 position to create this new digital society, and not to seek to recreate old paper-based processes in the digital world. We've seen that time and again, and we should rethink what's being delivered to make sure that it's digital native. In the post-COVID-19, what we really want to see is something we call build back better. So don't recreate what was, but in building back, that we make it better than it was and make it digitally native from the very beginning. So there's about 4 components of building back better in our mind. So the digital strategy must deliver jobs, right? So we have to drive job growth. And it's in these times, and they're tough for everybody, but we will come out the other side. And it's important that we have the building blocks for growth and job growth as part of that. And we see the digital strategy, if we place the right kinds of policy in place, in driving that growth. We want to see the creation of an Enterprise for Britain platform, which we see as a key tool for unleashing the potential of Britain's entrepreneurs, startups, and SMEs. We would envision this platform would aggregate and personalize information, taking advice and guidance from businesses, and in the process, removing those barriers which hold businesses back. Envision a one-stop shop where your financing options, mentoring schemes, training opportunities, and all other information is there for our great British entrepreneurs to thrive. Crucially, this is something that the government has invested heavily during the economic fallout, and we need to make sure that we equip the businesses to take advantage and accelerate out the other side. Beyond jobs, we need skills. So we very much welcome the Prime Minister's speech last week, highlighting the government's lifetime skill guarantee. He's right, we have to invest in skills. It's key to driving productivity, particularly on the back of the post-COVID era. And a digital strategy needs to put particular emphasis on those digital skills. We can't become a digital nation until we have a skilled digital workforce. And that means that we must take all our talent through the process. And we see 2 key elements. One, we have to go and drive the opportunities for a new digital skills for tomorrow and take our youth with us, with schools, universities, and industry partners partnering together to drive this entrepreneurial spirit for our youth. Second, we very much welcome the lifetime skills guarantee because we all need to refresh our skills over time. So it's not something that just applies to the youth. At Atos, we run a Future Fit program, which looks to do just this. It focuses on reskilling people that are midway in their careers or been with Atos for a few years to make sure that they're better lined up for their customers going forward, and in turn make themselves more relevant. Beyond skills, we need collaboration. So we got to make sure that we don't lose the partnership spirit and the collaboration that's really come out of the COVID times, where we've seen sectors and businesses forgetting barriers, working together to drive a successful service and a successful outcome. We can't let those barriers come back in the post-COVID era. If we successfully craft this digital strategy between government and business, it's got to be one and one together. So we're a proud strategic supplier to the UK government at Atos, and we find this opportunity for dialogue through such groups as the Cabinet Office of Industry Forum incredibly positive, a great way to get together and make sure that we drive forward together. But jobs, skills, and collaboration aren't enough. We need to make sure that we support the right supply chain. We need to make sure that we support the digital entrepreneurs, the startups and the SMEs, so that they can take advantage of the post-COVID era. They need to have a fair shot at winning some of those opportunities in the digital economy, and they're very well suited to do so. For Atos, that's at the core of our mission. We've got a dedicated SMEs program called Horizon, which is out there identifying the best British innovation and making sure that we help nurture it as part of an integrated whole to better serve our customers, public and private. So the digital strategy needs to further encourage models such as this as we move forward to create a world-class digital UK society. Just to wrap up, this is a great time to develop a new digital strategy, which can kickstart us into the 2020s. The digital strategy should enable us to build back better and not recreate a non-digital activities online. We're encouraged by the collaborative approach DCMS is adopting to develop this. This is going to be a joint effort. If it's going to be successful, it has to bring together government and business, and Atos is committed to doing so to help make this strategy a success. Let's make sure we use this time now wisely to develop the strategy. We may not get a better chance, and we need to ensure this digital economy is geared to play its fullest part in helping build the country to build back better. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Clay. And now we'll move on to Polly. And Polly, I have introduced you at the beginning, but feel free to add any additional comments about demos.
Sure, thank you so much, Charlotte. I'm very excited to be here, particularly because my first ever job was writing copy for the in-house magazine of Atos. So I feel like this has been 20 years in the making, this event. Thank you for having me. I run Demos, which is a non-partisan think tank that focuses on bringing the public into public policy. And since April, we have been running a program called Renew Normal, the People's Commission on Life After COVID, trying to offer a platform for people to get involved. We've had about nearly 50,000 people get involved one way or another in putting forward their ideas and their experiences around the crisis and how that has shaped their reflections on what they would like Britain to be involved with and how they would like Britain to change in the light of this. And one of the things that really struck me is that we do quite a lot at Demos on technology policy. And so there was one area of our big consultation that focused on technology, and the dominant theme, I somehow spent too much time thinking about policy. So I was thinking it was going to be about fake news or misinformation or something complicated. And it was just, please make the Wi-Fi work. Just dominant experience of people during the coronavirus lockdown of being so intensively reliant on digital services like Zoom, like this, and just being immensely frustrated by crackles and noise and breakdown. And that reinforced for me how essential it is to just make the pipes work for people, no matter where they are, because it's not just about rural areas or left behind areas. It's actually something that is an essential part of the whole nation moving forward and moving out of this crisis. And it's worth that really intensive high-level investment with government collaborating with the private sector to ensure that people can get connected and can be permitted to see all the opportunities of digital services and digital innovation. At Demos, I guess our overarching focus really, or inquiry, is about what makes democracies work in this modern age against all of the enormous threats and challenges about whether really liberal democracy is the best way of running a nation. And we think that the process of holding a demos, a people together, is absolutely essential. And so what's happened during coronavirus of so many existing inequalities being sharpened or widened, and people's experiences being so divergent in a way. At the beginning of lockdown, we were told that this would be a unifying experience, and it sort of was, except that for some people it was liberating and life enhancing, and for some people it was the worst months of their lives. And our ability to empathize across that divide is really difficult when we cannot connect, when we're limited to these digital interactions. So for me, making sure that we work together collaboratively to think about how you might conquer those divides without becoming Luddite and saying, oh, digital technology is bad because it leaves some people behind, or moving to digital transactions is bad because some people really like cash. Well, we need to work out what is it that people really valued about face-to-face services or cash, and work out how can you create innovations in the digital space that enable people to do that. And then how do you reconceptualize things like face-to-face services or our high streets to make them work in an age where we cannot rely on the models that we've been used to for, at least 100 years. That's an enormous challenge. I think it's so important for us not to underestimate the challenge. It's been amazing to see. I'm sure both people on the panel and anybody listening will have had an experience of somebody who was pretty skeptical about the internet getting involved for the first time. My mother is finally on Facebook. She posts she's definitely not listening, so I can talk about her, very strange kind of photo stories about the ornaments in her house. She had this whole thing with a hare and a tortoise, and they had a race, and then they got drunk. Very strange, right? But it's brilliant to see people who were kind of hostile giving it a go for the first time, and we've seen that big shift. But one of the challenges that poses for those people who are still outside, in a way they've become more expensive to deal with because they are the group who are further and further away from that digital transition. So before I ran Demos, I ran a think tank looking at the links between financial difficulties and mental health problems. And I particularly looked there at the question of financial advice or benefits advice, debt advice for people. And if you, in the old world, before digital innovations, people cost about £100 each to help. And one of the challenges is that in that £100 average, it's quite easy to fit in a few people with really severe mental health problems who actually need 5 times that much support, because there are a few people who are quite quick to help, and it just averages out. When you start to do digital innovation and you move some people to web chat services or to bot-based services or all sorts of innovations, that's fantastic because you can deal with loads and loads of people at about £9 a head. But it means those people who cost £500 a head suddenly look disproportionately expensive to deal with. And I think sometimes when we theorize about the value of digital transformation, we forget to include the people who were the outliers, the ones at one end of the difficulty curve in terms of what they were getting from public services and what they needed. And so we look at the service and we think, oh, we can turn this from £100 on average to £10 on average. Great, 10x saving, hooray, digital. And we forget to factor in that even if you take the 5% of people who need £500 value services, if you still add them into this, you're still making savings. It might not be that magic 10 times savings, 10, you know what I mean? But you're still, if you think about the whole service, you are making savings. And so I think we need to redesign the model that when we think about public services, because public services are inherently different from everything the private sector has to deliver, in that they have to help pretty much everybody. You can't just, if a supermarket is losing 5% of people who are just too hard to reach, fine, that's the cost of business. It's the same with a bank. But if you are the welfare system, you have to be able to help the most difficult, the most hard to reach people. And that means you need to think about a service design that can accommodate them. And in a way, recycle some of those fantastic savings that you can get from digital innovation into enhanced and even better face-to-face services, where what we may need to see is a phalanx of people who are just fantastic at going out there to the hardest to reach people and acting as a kind of buckle to help connect them in to digital services, whether that is pharmacists, a high street service enabling people to connect into services via doctors or, digitally, for example, because expecting everybody to be able to do that from their home is too much of a stretch. Like, what are our libraries for? And then actually, Matt brought up the high street, but actually if you think about high streets not as having to be anchored by bog standard retail, which it's been amazing to have the high streets, something where people can come together, have shared interactions, anchored and paid for by essentially retail. But if retail is going to shift, well, we just need to rethink what's the financial model of our high streets. And the transition of that is going to be expensive and difficult, but the opportunity there is also enormous. And if we can redesign the high streets around community services, around actually front ends for public services to enable people who might otherwise struggle to interact, around the face-to-face services, around job clubs as a place for our welfare offices, recognizing that actually it's connection with other people that people need alongside what they used to get at the job centre, which we thought that when we turned that digital benefit claim into a digital thing, fine, then people don't need to come to the job centre. Actually, they do, because it's connection and community that they're seeking. And so every piece of high street infrastructure, every piece of public service front end needs to, I think, be reconceptualized around community. And instead of us assuming that all of the savings from digital transformation just disappear somewhere into the system, that's what they need to be focused on funding. And we cannot use retail, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, I quite like online shopping personally, as a kind of free rider for the value of high streets and public space anymore. It's going to need to be a huge shift. And then one final thing, I just want to tell you about the kind of the big intellectual project that we are doing at Demos, in that I've talked to Matt before, we talk a lot about online harms. And that's a very important conversation to be had. But I worry that in the conversation about online harms, we spend too little time instead thinking about what do great spaces look like on the internet? What is the value system that would hold the internet, the structure together in liberal democracies? What's the web that we actually want? If we focus just on chopping off the bad bits, we aren't pushing forward and thinking about what makes great communities work. There's loads of evidence about what works in the physical space. And we're only in the foothills of trying to understand and then push for what makes really great communities, really great interaction work in the digital space. So we are running a kind of multi-year program called the Good Web Project that's trying to start that conversation as a contribution that goes beyond thinking about just online harms, and recognizing that actually with real thought leadership, with the values of liberal democracy, you can build an internet that can underpin and facilitate the democracies that we want. We are in competition with the intellectual forces of state authoritarianism. You know, the Chinese have a really clear view of how the internet should be run. And, you know, I disagree, but, you know, that's normal. I don't think we have a competing vision, really, because our conversation has been so dominated by there's a few bad things we want to chop off. And so that's a conversation that we would love to continue to have with both those on the panel and in the community.
Thank you, Polly. And Anthony, on to you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, and good morning, everybody. So lots to agree with in the session so far. I just wanted to say just a couple of things about the importance of the digital strategy itself, and then just a couple of things on the kind of COVID reflections. I mean, very sort of top level in terms of the importance of the digital strategy, and why, from our perspective, this needs to be a kind of a whole government endeavour. And it stems from a very simple kind of simple question, which is that, you know, if our vision for the UK economy kind of post leaving the EU, but also kind of post COVID, if that vision isn't to be one of the world's leading digital economies, then what exactly is the plan? Because it's a simple question, but I simply can't see any other positive scenario for the UK that isn't that we're a world leading digital economy. I mean, even if you say, okay, we're going to be the most sustainable green economy, you know, you simply can't achieve that without digital. So, and I think if you ask yourself that question, you suddenly realize why this is such a fundamental question for this government, and why the digital strategy itself needs to be kind of embedded right across governments and right across all bits of all parts of government. The second thing is, I think when we're thinking about this digital strategy, is that a world-leading digital economy isn't just about the supply side. So it's not just about growing massive tech companies. It has to be about how you use technology with purpose to make things better for people, for the economy, for society and planet. And I think it's quite interesting. I mean, if you look at the US, a huge leader in terms of on supply side, in terms of all the biggest technology companies. But when you look at the extent of the benefit that is felt across US society, I think you could argue that in many areas, a failure to sort of digitize the rest of the economy means that they're not actually getting the full benefits of digital. So we need to be thinking as much about the demand side and about how we apply digital as to thinking about how we kind of create the conditions to grow these super successful companies. And then I think in terms of thinking about, well, what do we actually need to do? What should guide us in thinking about this digital strategy? We think in terms of the 3 C's for digital, which is around capability, capacity, and confidence. I mean, the capability to be world leading, that's the skills, the knowledge, the infrastructure that you need. The capacity is about, I think, is this issue around our ability to do this at scale. And thinking about the capacity to absorb the benefits of digital right across society, public sector, private sector, large businesses, small business, and so on. But also confidence. I think confidence is absolutely key. We see this in public sector, we see it in SMEs, we see it so many times. A lack of confidence can be an enormous barrier to making progress. And so how do we really instill and build this kind of confidence? And then I would also kind of, on the back of some of the conversations that we've been having around the country, we've been talking to at a kind of regional level around the country since May about the COVID experience and how digital can help. I'd say a kind of critical thing is going to be cohesion, because when you're thinking about the application of digital, this can't be just about a national strategy, because so much of what we achieve has to be done at the local level. So we've got to be thinking about kind of local, regional, national, and then global, about those kind of global markets and about how and that global investment that we want to see coming in. And we've got to make sure all of that is cohesive across the piece. I think there are lots of positive things that we're sort of picking up and seeing happening around the country, but it's a bit patchy. And I think so. Again, this digital strategy I think can really add value there. It's kind of drawing those threads together. But I wanted to kind of just move on and think about just some of the COVID experience, because I've barely been on a call in the last kind of 6 months where somebody hasn't said, we've achieved 3 years of transformation in some variation of 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 months, whatever it is. But there's palpable sense that, wow, we really were able to apply technology in a very, very positive way to adapt very quickly to this incredible change. And I must say, I mean, it's a great exercise just to think, imagine if COVID-19 had happened 20 years ago. Imagine if it was COVID 1999. And we would have been text messages, email, and office-based servers, and then you kind of think, wow, we would have really, really struggled, and the economic impact would have been huge. And so we've clearly managed to achieve so much on the back of digital. And I for one, I mean, in terms of, in the early days as techUK, we did, we thought, is everything going to stand up here? Are these networks going to kind of stand up, and meet the challenge? But actually, what we found, I think what we've seen is our digital infrastructure has been remarkably resilient. But it also has reminded us just how dependent, to Polly's point, how dependent we are on that Wi-Fi and everything else that underpins our digital infrastructure. So lots of good things, and an absolute desire to kind of lock in what we achieved, lock in that transformation and build on it, whether it's GP consultancies going online or whatever it is. There's lots we can build on, which is fantastic. two really important things, I would say. The massive increase in people showing interest in acquiring digital skills. This is a really, really important moment that we have to build on. People are recognizing that digital skills in this very, very difficult labor market that we're approaching, digital skills are really important. We've seen a massive increase in people saying, how can I acquire those digital skills? And I think a really positive support response from industry and from governments and so on. But also a massive increase in SMEs thinking, okay, how do we advance the digitization of our businesses? And again, something that we need to seize upon. But I wanted to focus in on four aspects of COVID that really worry me, and four things that I think that are important lessons for us going forward. And the first of those is education and schools, because I think, I mean, as a parent, but also kind of widely talking to a lot of people, I think it's very clear that schools in particular really struggled through the lockdown with response in terms of how do they respond to online home working and so on. And what you saw was a very, very patchy, varied response. And in particular, you saw, back to Polly's point, the critical issue. If you've got a small cohort of your school population, that don't have access to the connectivity or don't have access to devices, then that undermines what the whole school response can be. And I think in schools we saw, in terms of those questions about capability, capacity, and confidence, I think schools really, really struggled there. And despite the fact that I think a lot of tech companies tried to respond, making software available, making devices available, I think what you still see is a situation where schools are really kind of struggling with how would we do, if we had to do that again, if we had to do the home learning thing again, how would we deliver it? And I sense, real issues there that I think we should focus on and see how we can help. Secondly, the exams kind of debacle over the summer. When we get to a situation both where, excuse my language, but you've got young people with placards standing outside a government department saying "fuck the algorithm," and this is national news, then that's a failure, right? And I think significantly undermining that critical issue of confidence in the way in which technology can help. But I think the important thing with that exercise was, the algorithm wasn't the problem here. The problem was what we asked the algorithm to do, because the algorithm did exactly what we kind of asked it to do. And I think very interesting listening to Roger Taylor in his select committee evidence, really, focusing in on this thing of the problem was in that project and in trying to work out how to respond to how do you allocate grades when you don't have exams. Everybody was so focused on trying to fix the problem that there was nobody in the room saying, but hang on a minute, the outcome here isn't going to be publicly acceptable. And a really fundamental question about how do you use technology appropriately and responsibly and ethically in a very, very ethically complex situation. So lots and lots, I think, we can learn from the exam debacle over the summer. Third one for me is the COVID app itself. And I mean, we were talking just before we came online, I've downloaded the COVID app. Everybody I know has downloaded the COVID app. But there was that moment, I think, in the process where suddenly we kind of got locked into this idea that the COVID app was going to solve everything. And we got locked into this sort of tech solutionism kind of bit where if we by having the world's best possible app, we can absolutely address all the issues of test and trace. But whereas actually what we know is both test and trace requires lots of basic human level organization and intervention. The technology itself wasn't going to solve that. And I think and that's a lesson there about the danger of getting too sucked into this idea that tech can solve every problem. Tech solves problems when it works alongside people and alongside processes. And I think we need to learn from that. And then the fourth one that really worries me, and again, I think plays to some of what Polly was talking about, is the 5G conspiracies. From our perspective, at the height of the pandemic, when you're seeing, telecoms engineers out there every day trying to maintain that essential connectivity, and then being abused in the street and being attacked in the street, when you see key parts of the infrastructure literally being burnt down because people are sharing ideas and thoughts about technology that for any technologist just seem beyond absurd. I think that there's a really serious problem there about how do we make sure that we that people as a whole buy into and can understand this increasingly difficult to understand world of technology, and also, of course, the role that technology itself and social media platforms have played in the way in which some of those conspiracy theories of became viral. So I think sort of 4 kind of warnings there, and they all say something, I think, about some of the big issues that we need to think about in this digital strategy. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony. And now we move on to Felicity.
Thank you, Charlotte. And I've really enjoyed listening to the comments from all of the other speakers, and of course most of them said things that I wanted to, so I'm going to start responding to some of those comments, particularly Anthony's, actually, because I do recognise a lot of the challenges that he's raised there, and a lot of worries, particularly around things like trust in algorithms, trust in apps, and government use of technology. And all of those things are quite big challenges. But I think that there is a flip side in that people have really had a chance to feel much more open-minded about innovation and technology and change over the last 6 months. I've been really lucky working in innovation and digital at the CBI. I have seen the best of what British business has been able to do in terms of stepping up to meet some of the challenges of the crisis. So I was quite closely involved in some of the work that our members were doing around totally changing their factories to produce ventilators or PPE or hand sanitizer. And we saw at the same time government stepping up alongside industry to provide new funding mechanisms really quickly, and new support, and lots of people sort of stepping up, trying to make a difference and genuinely innovating in terms of new processes and new ways of and new products as well. And then, of course, we've seen the businesses who are stepping up to help out. We've seen also a lot of businesses just trying to figure it out. And the 3 years of innovation in 3 months statistic is one of my favourites. So Anthony, I'm afraid I will have to use that one on this call. But it's really important because before the crisis, we were talking about innovation adoption, and we talked about, yes, the UK's got some brilliant companies who are absolutely leading the way in terms of technology development and adoption, but we have this really long tail of companies that aren't doing it. It's a persistent problem. It's one that I think we still need to get to grips with, of how much this problem has changed. But we've seen 47% of businesses take up virtual meeting tools, 30% of them looking at things like physical technological solutions, virtual collaboration, cloud, you name it. More businesses have taken up those technologies in the last 6 months, and that's really exciting, because when it comes to taking up technology, well, I'm gonna use a slightly outdated Sex and the City reference here, because I really love it. There's a scene where the girls are talking about how whether a man is ready to marry you or not, and they're sort of saying it has to be the right moment for him. It's like a taxi. The taxi's light has to be on, and it's a little bit the same for people when it comes to adopting technologies, and for businesses when it comes to technologies as well. You kind of have to be ready for it, in the same way, Polly, your mum joining a Facebook group. It's been very much the same for my mum signing up to Zoom, although she now uses Teams much better than I do. And I think it's really about sort of capitalizing on that moment, and that's why this is such a great moment for digital strategy. Absolutely not meaning to sort of make any of those challenges that have been raised any smaller, because I think that they are all really important. But we do have a moment where we can really change things. And I think in terms of the things that we've been talking to businesses about that are important, first and foremost, it is make the Wi-Fi work. It's go for it on gigabit. And really delighted actually to have been working closely with Matt Warman and DCMS on the new GigaTag group about encouraging uptake of digital infrastructure, both among businesses and also among households. So we've been working with Which on that as well, which I think is really important. But we do need to see more accelerated action on delivering digital infrastructure and making sure that that goes to the hardest to reach houses. The second is around delivering dynamism. So we think regulation is really important when it comes to technology, but we need a strategic approach to it. So making sure it's joined up, making sure it's cohesive, and investing in the institutions that we need to deliver it. The third, very much linked to my sort of opening comments, is about accelerating technology adoption. We need to join up, we need to scale up, and we need to simplify support to drive innovation adoption. And I was interested to hear about Clay's proposals around enterprise for business. We've been sort of exploring a similar idea around whether there's potential for a new body, which we would call Accelerate UK, looking at sort of joining up a lot of the support that already exists for innovation adoption. Alongside adoption, we do also need to make sure that we're looking at the policy environment for business R&D and increasing innovation more generally. It's exciting because at the same time that we have DCMS looking at digital strategy, we have BEIS looking at an R&D strategy. These two things absolutely need to talk to each other. R&D creates a lot of the new digital technologies that we want to use in the future. And then finally, very much linked, I think every single other speaker has mentioned this as well, is around upskilling on digital. About 67% of our members, when we surveyed them last year, said that they had digital skills gaps. The good news is that over 90% of them were working on those digital skills gaps, but this absolutely has to be a collaboration between government and business on this. And I think that the Prime Minister's announcements last week were a really important step forward, but more to do in terms of things like making the apprenticeship levy more flexible to deliver more skills, and making sure that things like job centres are well set up to deliver retraining and skills provision throughout people's lives.
Well, thank you, Felicity. It's been so interesting listening to all the different thoughts today. There's a lot to get stuck into. So I thought we'd start by going back to the digital strategy, and I'm going to start with Matt. And first of all, I'm going to ask when can we expect it? Because it's an autumn strategy, but is there a date now? And also, I know that the last one in 2017 talked a lot about online harms and other areas, but following on what Polly talked about a more positive vision, do you have any thoughts? Is it coming away from what was written up in 2017? Anything of what we can expect?
Nearly. So I think autumn is still the answer to your question, but it is. Is it? Do we see, and does industry and does business see a desire to sort of say, well, 2017 was a long time ago, and we need a completely radical rethink? No, I think actually 2017 strategy set a direction of travel that allowed us to have the sort of disproportionately digitized in a good way economy that we have, and that members of techUK and others have built so effectively. Are there, however, things that have changed since 2017? Of course there are. And are there things that have changed in the last few months? Of course there are. So I think it's a sort of, it's a mixed picture in that sense. But there are some things that are obvious, right? That one is that connectivity is foundational to almost all of the future economic opportunities that the UK has, and that it is also foundational to the public sector, because although Polly is completely right that you can't say the options are only digital when you are running essential services, we do also know that there is more and more appetite out there for public services to be digitized, and more of an understanding, I think, that there are real benefits for people taking that sort of small leap that just a few months ago or a few years ago they were much more skeptical about. So I think we've seen what we've got to see in the new digital strategy is the tools to grasp those new opportunities and to tackle those sort of more obvious challenges. I think if you'd have talked about disinformation and misinformation in the way that we do now just a few years ago, people would have thought that you were sort of really at the scaremongering end of the spectrum. When you literally, as Anthony said, see people burning down 5G masts or what they think might be 5G masts, then that gives you a sense of how real this is, especially when some of those masts, it turns out, were literally connecting the Nightingale Hospital. So I think that the strategy is very much, it is of course a sort of live document. You don't set these things in 2017 and make no changes, but it is about building on the opportunities that we now have to have as a country, and bearing in mind that we also have some new responsibilities as a result of COVID.
Cool. So, and coming back to that point from Anthony about disinformation and 5G, Polly, what do you think we're going to do to combat this? Because it seems to be a growing problem.
Yeah, and it's going to be a problem around vaccination as well. Assuming that a vaccine emerges for coronavirus, then I think we need to be getting ahead of how we will promote responsible information around that. I guess what we're most troubled by is the impact of algorithmic content generation and the pathways it pushes people into. We started looking at this probably 6 or 7 years ago at Demos, looking particularly at pathways into radicalization and for people being exposed to kind of jihadi content. But what's interesting is that the pathway is really similar, whatever topic you shift into, the pathway into radicalization, whether it is eating disorders, via kind of dieting websites, through to extreme dieting, through to pro-Anna communities. And it feels, liberal, extremely odd to be thinking that, government should be getting into the weeds of exactly how a private company is regulating how it generates the content. But nevertheless, there are real problems here around this new thing we have created, which is neither a publisher nor simply a platform. And that's why I think that you need to actually start with, maybe it's because I run a think tank, right? But you need to start with, what are the value principles? What are the theoretical frameworks that we use about what access we want? Because I don't think we do in a liberal democracy want to say that there should be only one regulated source of information, and it should be the government. And when we see this, the internet and the democratization of information can be such a powerful tool for transformation, for innovation. But how do you do that whilst ensuring that the market incentives do not, as they currently do, drive people towards ever more radicalization in all sorts of directions? Because for me, again, as I think that the key thing about making democracy work is that word demos. It's the idea of being a people, of having a way of holding together, and that has to be driven by institutions and identity and a sense of a shared reality. And when you have that fragmentation of realities, you threaten the very underpinning theory of democracy. So and that's why online harms and this concept of harmful but not illegal content, there's a reason why the government is moving relatively slowly on this, and we can all sort of roll our eyes and go, oh, you promised a white paper. Actually, it's really complicated. It should be complicated. It should be done judiciously, but we have to recognize that the idea of a common reality is worth investing serious time and energy in, whether it's through regulation or whether it's through content generation, whether it's through institutional efforts. It strikes me as the BBC, for example. I rather love the BBC. In the Cold War, right, the BBC and the World Service went out and was kind of proactive in its provision of information, of being a reliable information source around the world for people who were denied that. It seems to me that the BBC ought to be, instead of sort of sitting quietly in its box, fact checking, is to have a much more aggressive strategy of interference, I think, against those radicalization pathways, because it's one of the most trusted sources of news and information. But that's a sort of half-baked policy paper that I haven't quite written yet. So I'll have a more developed version of that in a few months, I think.
Charlotte, can I just come in very quickly on this one?
Well, I meant to say, do raise the hand, do jump in at any point. Go ahead, Anthony.
No, because I think I'd highly recommend. There's an excellent new book called Deep Fakes by Nina Schick, and which talks about kind of where this goes next as well, and some of the potential for synthetic video and the impact that could have on kind of undermining trust in democracy and so on. But I think it's very interesting in that book where Nina is very kind of clear to say, her view is, if you see this simply through the lens of it being a tech problem and a problem with tech companies and a regulatory one, that that will fail, and that this has to be, when we look at kind of information and disinformation, we've got to look, right across, in terms of the public dialogues that we have today. I think it's a very important one for politics and for politicians to think about, the way in which information is presented, but also it goes, to the heart of some of the kind of security questions about the way in which, the risk of allowing your public dialogue to be infiltrated and distorted by foreign powers and so on. So it's a multi-dimensional question. I think technology and technology companies are part of the solution, but it's a classic one where we've really got to work together and bring everybody into this dialogue to think about how we're going to address this really, really big challenge going forward.
And would anyone else like to, Clay, would you like to come back to that?
Sorry, going off mute. Without a doubt that it's not about just the technology companies, and I think Felicity actually struck a chord around the idea that we think of the tail, and we often think of the tail as the people and the tail that have access, right? And I think there's two ways: they have access and they have skills. But there's also the companies that are in the tail, and that's not always something that we fully think about. And then when we think about that, we probably think about the SMEs that fall in that live in that branch. But actually, it's much more than that, because if you look at the SMEs that are not the tech company SMEs, there's someone that very much could be left behind, right? And I think that's why this whole idea of kind of building back digital is so critical for us right now. Because as we go and try to help those companies, we need to make sure that we just don't recreate the paper past, right? So this is an opportunity to lift it and to break down some of those inequalities that persist. And if we don't do it now, it's going to probably be a whole lot harder down the road. So, but it's not just the technologies, it said, it has to be the process. And the way that we think about these things, and that's why when I say digital native, right, you heard of cloud native possibly. Digital native means that you remove all the people interface to start. And you see how you can have something flow end to end. And before everyone talks about, well, that takes away jobs, it doesn't actually. But you flow end to end, and that allows the vast majority of the things just to happen with right first time, high quality response to everyone. But then that frees up what currently are your resources, then focus on the tail. So then you have the resources freed up to focus on that tail, whether it's the manufacturing tail or the people tail. Polly was talking about the higher end services that we provide to some of those people that are in the tail. The only way you do that is by creating headroom and productivity in the core. But that's not about technology, right? And probably the best example for me is everybody focuses on RPA. And for me, RPA is the last resort, not the first resort. So you need to think about how do you take something and make it digital end to end, and then if it can't be, for whatever reason, time-wise or whatever else, then you think about how do I put a high-end paper, high-end support function wrap around it, and for some of those things you might RPA them out. But yeah, and without a doubt, it's not just technology. Technology is a key enabler, but it doesn't work without the people and process around it.
And Clay, you and Anthony, so you both talked about skills and the need to upskill the next generation. I just wondered, Felicity, how do you think we can get that out in schools, universities, how we can start gearing, because the government can do a lot of things, but how can we send that societal message?
Definitely, I think that's a really important question. If I can just say a little bit on the last section, and then I will step in on the skills point as well, because I just wanted to reflect actually. Almost all the speakers talked about the need for a vision when it comes to digital, and I think that's and sort of how that speaks to wider society, and that has come out so strongly in the conversations that I've been having with our members about this. And one of them put it really beautifully. They want to see the dreams and they want to see the detail. And I like those 2 points. Like, we need to know where you're going. We need to know what the big technologies you're investing in, what you really want to achieve from any of this is, because that provides us the certainty to invest and get excited. And if we have overseas owners, to convince them to invest in us. But then we do need a bit of the detail, because then we need to be able to plan and we need to be able to map things out with you. And I think when it comes to the detail, one of the key things on the delivery will be working with the business community on all of this, because the technologies are moving quickly, and very often it is the businesses that have a lot of the detail about sort of what's available. On skills, I think it's a really important question that you asked, particularly around the role of business here. And we know that sort of businesses getting out into schools is absolutely critical. Just a handful of interactions between someone from a business and individual in school massively reduces their chances of being not in education, employment or training when they're older. So that's a big sort of responsibility on businesses to do that. And I think one of the things that's really important is being able to inspire young people and explain what the jobs of the future are. I've just come off another call with the Made Smarter Commission, which is all about digitising manufacturing. And actually, one of the things that they were saying was quite tricky was you can see people sort of they know where they want to get to, maybe with the end point of their career, but they don't always know what the sort of the middle looks like, and what jobs they might need to sort of skill themselves for initially are. So I think that's one thing that businesses can look at is getting sort of younger people who've recently graduated or recently gone through an apprenticeship program to go back into schools and sort of talk about what the first few years of your career looks like. The other thing that we really encourage our members to do, I'm really going at it with my clothes metaphors and girly metaphors today, is to talk about shopping inside your own wardrobe. So this sense that you might have like an old suit and like the lapels are a bit too big, it looks a little bit tired, but it's a really beautiful suit. It's really well cut. The fabric is lovely. And actually, if you take it to a tailor, they can change it, make it a bit more trendy, and you can get several more years of wear out of that. Actually, loads of companies have people whose skills may be becoming obsolete, but they're really loyal employees. They're really bright people. They understand the company. They have good internal networks. And companies should be looking to upskill individuals within their own workforce as well. And then I guess the final point is, of course, there is a role for government here. I mentioned a couple of things around moving the apprenticeship levy to something much more flexible and supporting retraining through jobs and skills hubs at job centres. And that's also something at CBI we're doing a lot of research on at the moment, and we'll have more to say on retraining also in the autumn.
Well, thank you, Felicity. And on that note of upskilling people and We've got a question from Helen Milner, and she says, and I'll address this to Matt, she says, we know that for each £1 invested, the UK economy gets £15 back. Should we invest in fixing the digital divide now for the economy and to level up opportunities?
Yes, is the short answer, and I think that's what you see both in the Prime Minister's announcement around skills over the last week or so, but also it's what you see, as I sort of talked about at the beginning, in this, I think, sort of clarification, if you like, of what levelling up means, because it has to, especially if you have an economy where people can live across a sort of wider chunk of the country because they're content to work digitally or commute less or strike a balance between the two, then of course levelling up means more than geography. It comes to that sort of social picture, it comes to a skills picture as well. So I think Helen is absolutely right, and Helen has a sort of fantastic track record herself in trying and genuinely achieving a lot around this. But it's, as she more than anyone knows, it's easier said than done, right? Trying to get an older person to reskill is a battle that governments of many colours have fought over decades. Trying to get that right, I think, is something that we have got via digital means and others a greater opportunity now more than ever to see.
Okay, and then Donna Gavin, I've got another question. So moving on to a more international level, she asks, often digital challenges are globally shared or stem from outside of our shores. Is it time for a World Digital Data Organisation to tackle, and she suggested it can be called Digital Tories, but if anyone else has any other names, feel free to share them. Clay, would you like to answer this one?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question.
So often digital challenges are globally shared or stem from outside of our shores. Is it time for a World Digital Data Organisation to tackle?
I have to admit, I'm not sure I have an opinion on a World Digital Data Organization. I might have to hand that off to one of my esteemed colleagues here. Do I think?
Oh, sorry.
Do I think that we need to think globally in our competition and making the UK great? Without a doubt, right? You can't do that just by building up the walls and hiding behind them. But in terms of a world data body, I'd have to defer to someone else, I'm afraid.
Polly, do you have any thoughts on this?
Now, unfortunately, it doesn't quite feel like the era of expanding the international rule of law or global governance institutions, which is a shame, because I think that the post-war settlement to establish those organizations and enable countries to collaborate was one of the great leaps forward for the rule of law and for being able to tackle these issues that do transcend borders. It has somehow gone out of fashion in favor of a more 19th century individual nation states competing against one another, led by strongman leaders. And those of us who would like to see a move back to the idea of co-governance and international collaboration, we'll probably just have to wait our turn. I think that the problem is entirely correct to observe. So we're doing a piece of work around cybercrime at the moment, and it's worth reflecting that, what Peel said about the police is that the police are the people and the people are the police, reflecting the fact that in fact your enforcement can only ever be a tiny part of the idea of people complying with the law. And we see that with coronavirus regulations in a way. If people don't want to comply, then enforcement in fact cannot achieve it. And so what you need is a sense of shared ownership of what those laws are. And that's why the people are the police, as well as the police are the people. And one of the problems with international crime is that, if you are an entrepreneurial person in the Balkans, for example, getting involved in cybercrime, you don't feel that sense of being part of a demos, part of a people, because people are so far away. And that's why you do need, I think, to innovate quite dramatically in terms of how we we govern and how we do those challenges.
Can I make a point here? Because I think there are, I think the question is, in terms of, I think, and Polly's right, I think there's some real challenges here in terms of what's happening globally. And essentially, we're seeing, the European Union, kind of China and the US, as these big three kind of global centers of gravity that are going to have that all have slightly different visions really of how the digital world should evolve. And I think as we having left the European Union, I think that raises a challenge for the UK in terms of, okay, well, where do we sit in this new environment? But I think it's also an important opportunity, and I think it's one that links directly back to the digital strategy, because around the world, the UK is still seen as one of and has been one of the leading innovators in thinking about how you regulate for a digital world. The UK played a central role in particularly in the very early years of the European Union thinking about digital. And if you talk to businesses around the world, there is tremendous interest in what the UK thinks and how it approaches some of the most complex and difficult questions around regulation and policy for technology. And I think as we go forward, I think thinking creatively about how you, in a modern society, how you have all the enablers and safeguards that you need to have a modern, open, dynamic, confident digital economy, whilst also the right safeguards, whether you're thinking about competition policy, whether you're thinking about online harms and so on, and how you bring that together in a very kind of pragmatic and sensible way that's also kind of quite dynamic in terms of, in a changing world, you're going to need to be able to adapt and change your regulatory framework. My personal view is we've got the thought leaders, we've got the capability, we've got the capacity, we've got the businesses, we've got the institutions that should mean that I think the UK could come up with some really world-leading answers to some of those questions. And if we get it right, I think there will be companies and major investors around the world who are looking for that alternative approach to maybe the EU approach or the China approach or the US. And if they see the UK doing it right, that's when you have chief executives around the world saying, yeah, actually, let's invest in the UK because they're doing something interesting. And so for me, that's at the heart of the opportunity of getting this digital strategy right, because it's about, the UK being kind of world leading in terms of the diplomacy that will shape the 21st century. Which is about this digital future that governments around the world are focused on creating.
And Felicity, did you want to come back to that?
Yeah, I mean, I really like this idea of digital diplomacy and the UK being able to lead the way in this space. I think it's really important that we consider how the UK could lead the way like that as well. I won't be the first person to say this, but when it comes to things like AI, the UK is not going to lead the way in terms of spending. We are not going to have all of the inventions. Like China is massively going to outspend us, and despite the power of our research base, we are still a pretty small country in terms of population. We will come up with some brilliant inventions and innovations, no doubt. But the thing that we really can lead the way in is doing this right. And that we have already started to invest in some of this infrastructure. I think the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation is a really exciting body in that space, and we've got the new AI Ethics Institute at Oxford University. Clearly, this is something that the UK is already starting to think about, and our business communities and our research and academic communities are thinking about, and I know government is as well. But absolutely agree with Anthony that this is something that should underpin the way we think about the digital strategy, is how we build a trusted digital economy.
And Matt, how do you think we can further impress in this regard, get more investment into the country?
Well, so I think the question is a really interesting one. what it really is highlighting, though, ultimately, is in an increasingly globalized world, then problems are increasingly global. And I think both Anthony and Felicity are absolutely right to say there's a huge amount where Britain is genuinely leading the world. There is a reason why companies like NEC have put their 5G innovation centre in the UK. There's a reason why our work on ethics and AI is genuinely world leading. A lot of that, of course, is, as it has been with innovation for years, connected to our universities, but it's business as well that has got a huge part to play. And I think it's really important that, as Polly said, that there is a diversity of views on what the future of a digitized world looks like. And we really want, and we really need, I think, Western liberal democracies to be leading the way on that. And what we have done and what we will continue to do, and 5G is an example of this, is look to collaborate internationally with those countries that share our values, because inevitably that international cooperation talks to a market that is far bigger than Britain and addresses some of the problems that Felicity has just mentioned, but also taps into where our expertise really lies. So when it comes to 5G, it's British software developers, for instance, rather than British hardware manufacturers that are likely to play the greater role, but there's room for both. And I think we just got to make sure that we play to our strengths, and that means, I think, working collaboratively with a whole host of other countries. It doesn't mean that you have to set up a new organization with a new acronym and all of that, but it does mean working together in a meaningful way.
And talking about 5G a bit more, can you tell us a bit about the current situation with Huawei and what's going to happen with that?
Well, I think the decision that we announced relatively recently, just before the summer, about the elimination of Huawei from the 5G network by 2027 it's a big shift, and what it takes Britain towards, I think, is the introduction of one of the most secure cybersecurity telecoms networks regimes that we will see and that we could envisage anywhere in the world. What it also does, though, is sort of underline the necessity for us to work with British companies and, as I say, internationally, to make sure that we foster companies that can challenge what is currently too small and an insufficiently resilient number of companies that are providing critical network infrastructure. And so that is a big opportunity for UK business, but it's also a big opportunity for the UK, as I say, to lead the world on those new standards, and to make sure that in the future we don't end up overly reliant on companies where we don't feel we have sufficient reassurance.
Does anyone want to add anything to that point about Huawei or 5G? Or shall I move on to, so one thing I thought that Polly brought up, which was really interesting, is that your research on what consumers find are experiences that can't be converted into digital. I wondered if other people had any thoughts on this, what you think is not going to be moving in the digital revolution, is not going to be here to stay. Do you want to start with Anthony?
I mean, I think it's hard to think of things that won't be touched by digital in one way or another. And I think, but I think what I think, you know, the reality is that we're moving into a world where sort of everything in some way will be enabled or supported by digital. But I think that there's an important question about, you know, what are the values, what are the things that we want to bring with us into this digital world, and you know, at the broadest level, you know, liberal democracy, it's you know, should be something that can survive and thrive in this digital transformation. But I think it also you know, goes to the heart of what Clay was saying earlier, you know, which is, you know, when we're thinking particularly about, you know, the the services that are the fabric of our society, whether it's education, health and social care, and so on. You know, what people want most is human interaction. You know, what people want is the ability to interact and connect with the service provider, whether it's the talking to the teacher, or whether it is you know, the carer who has time to hold somebody's hand, you know, when they're in distress, whether it's about a doctor having more time to talk to a patient and understand. Now, all of those things can be achieved if we can free up people's time, and if we can free up resources, and if we can automate the things that need to be automated. So when we're thinking about how we apply technology, and also how we persuade the public of the value and benefit of digitizing our services and so on, you know, I think we've got to think about how do we explain these things that are about making people's lives easier, simpler, better, more rewarding, and so on. And it's all about those interactions. And you know, Felicity was talking earlier about kind of the digital strategy needs to deliver both dreams and detail. One of the challenges government's got is, you know, it's quite hard to sell dreams that are about kind of doing your tax forms more efficiently, or you know, getting a driver's license. Now, if you're a retailer or an online, you know, streaming service, it's quite easy to sell your vision to the consumer because you're giving something to them that they really want. Now, quite often government is giving things to people that they don't really want terribly much, like, you know, a reminder that they've got to fill in their tax form. So it's kind of how does government sell the message of delivering better for people? And I do think it's fundamentally, it's about humans and time, and freeing up the time in services for people to spend more time supporting society, supporting individuals. And that's how you start to sell the benefit of this.
And Felicity, did you want to expand on that?
Yeah, definitely. I find it difficult also, like Anthony, to find many examples of things that won't be touched by digital. You know, even sectors that I was talking to at the start of the recovery, like the sharing economy, which is a very sort of face-to-face sector, have found all sorts of new ways to do things digitally with people. Like Airbnb have moved loads of their experiences online, for example, and you know, really clever, creative things have happened because people have had to make changes to digital. But actually, the big thing that I think I've noticed in conversations with members is about that human interaction point, and particularly about human interaction in the office. So I think there's a real recognition that yes, we do not need to be there every day, 9 to 5, clocking in, taking up space, all of this kind of thing. But when it comes to building teams and having opportunities to collaborate, when it comes to training up new people or retraining people. I've had one member who said they've moved all their training online, but it used to take them 4 weeks and now it's taking them 8 weeks because their people can't physically use the kit. So there are things I think about teams and about interaction with the workplace that will need to move back to being physical, which isn't to say there won't be a sort of digital hybrid model there, but actually I think that that's a really important question for businesses to be asking, is so how do I want to use my office, and how do I kind of create communities and help bring the people that work back together.
Polly, did you want to add any thoughts you have as well?
I coughed, so I must. You know, I completely agree. So it's just a tiny thing, but we have an office on Whitehall, and it's sort of split between what used to be a kind of 65-70% of it, which was the formal desk space, and then a small event space. And even people are only using it very in small amounts at the moment. We've shifted that completely, because actually I think it's quite rare that people will be coming to the office just to work quietly. I mean, they might do if they haven't got a safe or a comfortable working space at home, or if they've got kids, or I don't know, building, well, all sorts of reasons. And so providing small formal working space is one thing, but actually we've configured the big space completely differently. So it's all about, it's like my model is the D school at Stanford of just whiteboards and bucket loads of Post-it notes, because people will only use physical space if if you're getting the kind of the collaboration dividend, I think, because it's only worth the hassle of doing that. And so we're going to run a whole program of work next year to try and look at what are the productivity gains, what are the innovation gains you can get from this different model of working that uses physical interaction for what it's brilliant for, and then allows people to get both the well-being and potentially the productivity dividend of being in actually, for lots of people, a very quiet working environment, not having to have water cooler moments or people complaining about stuff or that weird person who keeps making loud phone calls. You know, actually we might be able to use this as a real lever for tackling some of our management and productivity problems as a country.
And what do you think, Clay?
It's a lot there. So first of all, I think from a delivery perspective, in terms of delivering services, I think there's very few situations where we won't have a bit of a non-digital element as well in it. I think our default will be digital, but and the really successful businesses and services, right, from public sector will always have a combination of both. So be digital as much as you can, but then have a breakout room to support when digital isn't working, or for people that aren't digitally enabled. And again, you got to have connectivity, but you also have to have digital confidence. And so we're seeing some of that rise. And actually, that's one of the great beneficiaries of COVID, if there ever was one. There's a whole bunch of people out there that just would never think of themselves as digital, have now given it a go. And as was said before, though, I think from probably that means if some of those people that are left behind are even further left behind now, and we got to figure out how we do that. So services will be a hybrid. The really best services. Business the same way. I think, you know, I've worked in environments now that have been largely offsite for quite some time, and we have noticed that there's at some point, a couple of years out, there's a bit of a productivity drain where the rest of your daily life kind of creeps into your business life. And if you do that and you multiply it by 20 people on a team, it's not about the individual. Suddenly the team really finds it more difficult to find a way to be productive. Now they can do it, but it takes a different set of skills. And I think we still haven't figured out all those skills that we need to be able to, one, touch base with so many people, find a way to collaborate better in a hybrid world. And I think we're probably, if you think of a fully ready for it as a 10, I think we're at about a 2 right now, right? I don't think we even conceive of all the things that are going to be out there. But I think it has to be an and, right? I don't think it can be an or.
Well, thank you. Well, sadly, we're coming to the end of this session. I found it incredibly informative. I'm certainly feeling much more digitally confident after speaking to all you guys. So I'd like to thank Matt, Clay, Holly, Anthony and Felicity for their excellent contributions and time. I'd also like to thank Atos for making this event possible. And I'd like to thank you, the audience, for watching and your questions. If you'd like to see this event again, it will be on YouTube shortly on our Conservative Home channel. In the meantime, we hope you'll stay with us for our next event. It's at 1 PM. It's titled Social Care and Beyond, Delivering for Older Voters in the Red Wall. And Mark Wallace will be interviewing Deanna Davison, among other panelists, on this subject. In the meantime, everyone have a lovely Monday. Bye.
Goodbye, thanks.